name McCaleb's is there because that was the affectionate name that Skylar continued to call us in college. So that's Caleb and Michaela just put together as McCaleb. So I guess if that wants to stick here, you can stick here. Just to let you know, at first, I would much rather teach a lesson than do this. My personality, I would much rather talk to you about Scripture than my own life. But it's important to share stories like this. But luckily, my wife will get to go first. So this is Michaela, and I'd love you to listen.
Okay, I was talking to Caleb last night. I was like, I realized I've never really told my story other than to like a couple individual people. So you guys are my first go around. Well, I'm the oldest of 7 kids. There's a lot of us. Just a little snapshot of my family. We grew up from the outside looking in. You just think we have like a conservative, homeschool Christian family. And of course, we're homeschooled because there's 7 kids. Everybody knows that goes hand in hand. So on the outside, it looks like that little family shell. And I remember thinking, this is never, this is what life is always going to be like. But inside our home, my mom came from a lot of trauma and abuse, and she never really allowed God to permeate her heart and her mind, even though she spoke about Him. And so she was also very abusive herself. So she kind of, one single person kind of tore the family down on a day-to-day basis. So sometimes our family would be very put together, and she'd be there every day and running the family, running the show, and making things run smoothly. And then other times she would have mental breakdown and disappear for a couple days. So when I just basically had to be a second mom. So sometimes people ask us why we only have 1 kid. So I remember when my little sister, she just turned 18 actually a couple weeks ago. She was a baby and my mom left for like a week, and we had to like scramble and figure out how to take care of a baby that was brand new, just me and my dad. So that just kind of was our life looking in. No one really believed that my mom was the way that she was. No one would believe us as kids. They would always just come and tell us we need to be better kids. So I'm going to stick to my notes just so you know. My dad is the reason that I'm a Christian. I at least for the first decade of my life, I would be able to go and talk to him, ask him questions that were hard, that were easy, and he was the reason that I became curious about Jesus in the first place. So he he really loved God, and it made me want to explore who God was. His own passivity allowed my mom to hurt us more, but beyond that, he was a really great dad, and I am still very close to him today. He baptized me when I was 10, and as I look back on my story, I just think that my life experiences shouldn't have brought about the light and hope that in the family that we have. I shouldn't have the husband I have. I shouldn't have a good relationship with Ronan that I have. But because of God, I look back and I just see so much of where he was. So my family was able to my dad was able to kind of hold our family together until I was in my early teens, 12 and 13, and then things kind of started to go downhill. I don't think he was able to hold it together anymore. It's a lot to hold together. So around that time, my family just kind of started to fall apart. We stopped being able to function on a day-to-day basis and do homeschooling and, 3 square meals, that type of thing. So around that time, I got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. And I think that kind of sent my dad into a tailspin, trying to hold everything together on top of that. But when I look back on that time, I don't see the darkness that it was. I remember one night, I was alone and in my hospital bed, and I just remember feeling like the presence of God like next to my bed, on my hands, and I knew he was there. And that's how, when I look back on my life, that's how I see my life. It's just his presence is so clearly there. Yeah. So I knew I wanted to do ministry, and I decided I wanted to go to Ozark for that. And that's kind of where my story joins with Caleb.
Yep. I just really appreciate her for sharing that. So, well, there's pictures of me. I grew up, I was born in Aurora, Colorado. In Aurora Hospital, I was born January 1st of 1990. So, yeah, I know everybody's like, oh, that makes me feel old. I'm sorry. Maybe for some of you teens, it's like that long ago. It's kind of in this weird middle ground. But, yeah, I was born January 1st, 1990. I was the second baby born in the hospital. To this day, my mom still upset because she was in labor 10 hours longer than the lady who did the first baby. So, sorry, Mom. I was kind of a stubborn kid. So I guess growing up for me, I mainly grew up in Colorado. I grew up, after my parents moved out of an apartment in Aurora, I lived in kind of a trailer home in a place called Dacono, Colorado. You probably would never notice it if you drove through it. But that's where I lived till I was about 8 or 9. Then we moved to Longmont, and Longmont is probably where I grew up the majority of my life, just outside of Boulder, Colorado. So everybody goes, oh, culture shock for Portland. I'm like, not really. Boulder, Colorado is pretty similar, at least in terms of culture. So I kind of grew up real close to that. My growing up years, we weren't huge church attenders. If you would have asked us, my mom probably would have said my family was Christian. But if I'm being honest, there was no real way for me to know that. I didn't grow up with stories. I didn't grow up with leadership. I didn't grow up with any semblance of what faith was, and I really had no idea about the Bible or anything. So it was all just a bit confusing to me at the time. While I was growing up, my dad was an angry individual. Anger was always kind of on the edge of who he was, so you never know when he would pop off and things would get crazy. You can kind of assume what happens when stuff like that occurs. So there's some violence in the home, things like that I grew up with. And then at age 10, on Father's Day, I came home and my dad had packed up all this stuff and left. He had been having an affair with a lady, and he left my mom. I came home to him gone. He married that lady a couple months later. And then he moved 8 hours away on the other side of the Rockies. So he kind of disappeared for a while, and I didn't have a relationship with him. I was a very angry kid growing up, super angry. So angry, I remember punching holes in wooden fences and metal sheds in the back of our duplex. That was me. That was, if you could define Caleb at age 11 to 14, it would be angry. That would be the one word that you would find. Yeah, so that's a little bit of who I am. And then my mom, she was great. She worked 3 jobs sometimes to be able to help us out and put us through school and get us going. And she struggled a lot with that, and it wasn't easy for her. My dad leaving kind of sent the whole family into a tailspin. My older sister got pregnant at 16, and at 17, the guy who got her pregnant went to jail for murder. That's just like a little bit. I have memories of me and my little sister standing at the front porch steps as my sister was running away from home, screaming, asking her to come back. It's just a little bit of our family life, a snapshot. And so my mom decided after my dad took off that we should probably start going to church. My grandparents were Christians, great Christian people. I love them like crazy. And they're probably the reason that I am a Christian today, and my grandparents. And so we started going to church. I started getting involved in the youth group. And at age 14, at a CIY, a Christ in Youth event, there's a guy on stage by the name of Caleb, and he presented the gospel in a way that just left me saying, I need that. I need that. And to this day, I can't tell you exactly what he said. Maybe that's some of the way students feel about me. But I know that in that moment, I remember thinking, I need that. And so I went back, and on August 14th, 2004, I got baptized. And my life was different from there on. Anger started to slowly subside, and hopefully, I don't seem like an angry person anymore. That's when my life changed, and 2 years later at another CIY event, I heard clearly the call from Christ that I need you to be that guy named Caleb on stage to tell people about Jesus, that they are left with no other choice than to have him in their life. So that's what I did. From age 16 on, this is what I wanted to do. Before that, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot, because Top Gun was my favorite movie. And then when I realized I had to do math, I decided, well, I'll be Navy SEAL then. And God changed that into youth ministry. So that's my story, and then I went to Ozark. And yeah, so both of us kind of, to give you the overarching theme, I mean, I'm a teacher, so I like overarching ideas. The overarching theme for our life together would be loneliness. So both of us grew up very lonely in our contexts. So that trend kind of continued in college a little bit, but this is the story of us. So you may not be able to see it, but I take pride in this. This picture says, I am your father. It's Star Wars. So, yes?
Some of us in the back are having trouble hearing you.
Okay. I will speak up.
There's a front row right here.
Yeah, so the story of us, you start.
Okay. Okay. All right, so I was a freshman, Caleb was a sophomore, and he saw me and his whole world changed. I just remember seeing him in philosophy class. That was the class we had together, and we didn't really hang out in any circles. I just saw him in a purple Rockies hat, and that's the only way I knew him. But I was on, do you guys know Ultimate Frisbee? I was on an Ultimate Frisbee team, and so was he, just different teams. And he was like the sprinter that could take it down the field real fast. And so I remember hearing like his teammates just calling his name, and I just remember hearing Caleb Page, and I was like, that's a cool name. And then one day, on my very, very beginning of my sophomore year, like the convocation banquet, which is the very like first event of the year, my friends and I went to Sonic, the restaurant, after, and we, I remember walking up to the restaurant, and he was there with another friend, and he said, oh, hey, and I was like, hi, I had like barely ever spoken to him. He was like, so are you on any Ultimate Frisbee teams this year? And I was like, oh man, no, I haven't been able to find one that has room. And he said, well, if you give me your number, I can help you get on a team. So I gave him my number, and he put me on his team.
She said she knew what I was doing at the time. I don't think so.
I was pretty savvy.
Yeah, so a little backstory. Probably for the year prior to me doing that, I noticed her. I noticed who she was. I noticed how she carried herself. I noticed that she cared deeply for people and her friends. I actually got to know her friends so that I could get to know her better without actually getting to know her, which was weird. But I did that, and yeah, so growing up, I was very much like a white knight syndrome. I had to keep it all together for the family. I had to keep everybody together, and I had to make sure everything was good for everybody. So in my dating history before my wife, I was a white knight, which means I usually found the girls that were dealing with some really heavy stuff, and I was the one to fix it. Gentlemen, that never works. It always ends in pain, majority of the time. Can't say always because there are those stories. But it ended in pain for me. And so the thing that attracted me to Michaela was that she didn't need me. She didn't need me at all. She knew who she was, and she loved Jesus, and I was like, that's what I wanted. So I got up the courage at the end of the Ultimate Frisbee season. And I walked up to her, and I said, I want to be very intentional. I don't want to play the game where I go, hey, let's get coffee sometime. So I walked up, shaking like a leaf, and I said, hey, will you come get coffee with me this Thursday at 7 o'clock at Starbucks? And I gave her an exact time and date, and she said yes, and then I freaked out.
Yeah, so I remember us walking into the coffee shop, and I liked Starbucks, the passion fruit tea. So I was like, that's what I'm going to have. I'm excited because I'm not a huge coffee person. And I told him that on the way in, thinking nothing of it. And he told me later that he was like, oh no, I took her to the wrong place. But it was a awkward first couple months. I was terrible at dating, and I am a very awkward person. So one day, one of his friends came and he was like, do you like Caleb? And I was like, yeah, I really like him a lot.
This was after a month.
He was like, then you need to tell him that. So I was like, oh, okay. So after I told him, because on our second date, he was like, I like you, I want to start dating you. And I said, thank you. So I told him I liked him, and then pretty much it was history from there. We fell in love pretty quick after that point. And a year later, the next fall, Caleb asked me if I wanted to go carve some pumpkins with him. And he had convinced me up to that point that he could not afford a ring yet. And of course that wasn't the truth because he already had one. And so he asked me to go carve pumpkins with him, and I was excited. He was like, let's go. So I walked out into the dorm lobby, and I saw Steffi and Skylar sitting there being super weird because they knew it was about to happen. And I was like, that's weird. And then Caleb got in the car, and I was like, he's really nervous, but I never suspected anything just because I was convinced that he was really good at dates. He was like very creative and fun, and he still is at those things. And we drove up to a place called the Falls, and it just has waterfalls and rocks everywhere, and it was dark outside, and I saw all these like twinkle lights and candles everywhere, and I was like, wow, like he's really good at dates. So there was like a candlelit dinner set out, and like candles all over the rocks, and but he could barely eat, and I was just like, what is going on? And then he said, let's carve some pumpkins. And he took me over to where he had the pumpkins. He's like, I already started some for you. And he lifted off the blanket, and there were some pumpkins right there, lit up and carved already, that said, will you marry me? And I don't remember what he said when he proposed, but I said yes.
And then, so things progressed. We got married on May 12th, 2012. So this May will be 10 years that we've been married. And it's been awesome, been wonderful. We waited 4 years till we had that little guy. His name is Ronan. He's our son. He's a gift for us, a gift from God. That we're very excited that we get to course correct our family history together. That Ronan won't have to grow up the way we did. So we're excited about that. Excited to get that opportunity. And
we've been praying for years that God would give us community and friends, and we feel like our prayers are finally answered here. So, and it's only been 2 months, so I can't imagine how much better it will get.
Yeah, so the overarching theme of our lives again was loneliness, and we were alone before we got to college. We got married, we did everything alone, we paid for our wedding by ourselves. We didn't have any help with that. We've done everything on our own. Parenting, we were on our own. Didn't have anybody to help us, really even watch run. So we've just been alone for a long time. And through some hard stuff at the ministries that I was a part of before this, some really difficult things. Made parenting harder, made life harder. But I wouldn't trade that stuff right now, because I feel like all that hardship has done what I know God does, and that it refines you as a Christian. It makes you pursue Him more. And so I would say the story of our lives made us dive into Jesus with everything, because we didn't have anything else. And I think the echo for our lives is similar to the disciples. When the disciples, Jesus is talking about His body and His flesh, and you're going to have to eat that, and everybody else is like, this is weird, and we're out. And the disciples essentially say, where else will we go? And I feel like that's true for both of us. Where else will we go? And so we've just tried to be obedient, no matter how hard it was, and God has led us here, and so far we are overwhelmingly grateful to this church family and to God for being as good as He is.
Thank you guys for listening to our story.
So, I guess we got plenty of time for questions. Go ahead, if anybody's got a question.
Michaela, what are some of your hobbies? We know what you like to do. Well, we've heard some of what you like to do.
Okay. I love yoga. I teach yoga. That's one of my main passions and hobbies. I got into it when I had just married Caleb, and then when I moved to Oklahoma City, one of my friends invited me to a studio that was Jesus and yoga. And being introduced to prayer and scripture through movement, in the midst of movement, really changed things a lot for me. It really was like one of the first ways that I understood that God was in every moment. Yoga is about breath and being present, but I felt like God met me there, and that's one of the ways He showed up as my counselor and my healer, was that He was just there. He used yoga to remind me that He's there in every moment. So I love yoga.
She's a certified teacher through a Holy Yoga training program.
Sounds corny.
What else?
I like watching TV.
How about the oils?
Oh yeah, I love essential oils too. Yeah, we use those in our family. Yeah. I guess I don't have a lot of hobbies. Still love Ultimate Frisbee, but don't get to play that as much. Oh, can you? Let's do it. Let's do it.
Caleb, do you give lessons on how to date? I mean, Angie and I have been married 30 years. I'm wondering.
Well, I lucked out. It was one and only time I was creative.
I noticed there's pumpkins in the background too. Good job.
I know, right? It's a bookend, just like our last name page. But yeah, no, I don't give lessons on dating. You gotta figure that out on your own.
He does talk a lot about dating when kids come up and ask him, so he's really good at that.
And just, I guess we didn't mention it, but like, I'm her first boyfriend she's ever had.
Oh.
So that story is possible.
I do not recommend dating in high school.
What are your favorite things to teach about?
The Bible. Like, just everything in Scripture. It doesn't matter what it is. I just love teaching through books of the Bible, stories of Scripture, because as you march through a book, things inevitably come up. So as you're marching through a book of the Bible, people have questions, well, what about dating? Well, this stuff all talks about dating, so let's walk through all of it together. And often some people have a critique of the Bible that it's not explicit in there. The Bible doesn't just give me a passage that tells me how to date. The reality is it does, but you gotta dig for it. You gotta see what God is doing, what Jesus is doing in the whole story. And I love doing that. I love taking Scripture and showing where Jesus is throughout and what his big story is, and how as we connect with him, it's life-changing. So, that's a good question.
This is just more of a comment, but I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability. Sometimes what people grow through, you never know.
Yeah.
But when it's out there, you realize that God is a God that saves, and there's an unlearning process. So I really appreciate you guys being willing to be as honest.
Yeah, we both feel like throughout both of our stories, God has been everything that he said he would be in the Bible. He was our counselor, our healer, our sustainer. He was faithful, is faithful. So it's the only way I can tell the story.
Tell us about your connection with the elders.
All right, so it really started with Stephanie and Michaela. Stephanie and Michaela were roommates, and Stephanie was the maid of honor at our wedding. And so because of those two, Skylar and I got connected. And
So we're the reason this all happened. You can thank us.
Yeah, and then just kind of grew in friendship there because of our wives. And yes, you've probably heard the story before, but it's the story that we love to tell. We enjoy, one of my hobbies is I love playing disc golf. Really enjoy it. I've got a basket at my house and a bag and a bunch of extra discs. So if you want to go play, just tell me and we'll go. But we were playing disc golf in college, and Stephanie was having fun and just kind of threw a shot as hard as she could in a random direction and hit Michaela in the back of the arm. And,
I couldn't see anything for a minute.
It was painful, but it was funny.
I would go disc golfing with her again, though.
Hey, Caleb, thanks for sharing. It's awesome. How did you guys put the Lord first when you were dating, and then in your marriage too? How did you set a foundation that was built on the Lord?
So bottom line, it's kind of what I taught in youth group 2 weeks ago. I love Jesus way more than I love her. And she loves Jesus way more than she loves me. And it just has to be that way. The only way that I can love her well is by loving her like Christ, sacrificing myself for her. And if I'm focused on loving Jesus and loving her, then I don't have to worry about my own and worry about my own way, because she's going to love Jesus, she's going to love me too. And so in that context of dating, you really, as a young teen, you've got to understand that there's a purpose behind romantic connection in marriage. And we talked about that, and we'll talk about it here. And that purpose is to represent Jesus in the church. And that means that our marriage means more than just her happiness or my happiness. And that means that we pursue after Christ and his kingdom and his will. And no matter what that means for us. And I feel like that's brought us, I don't have to be her everything, and she doesn't have to be my everything. That's Jesus. So it allows us to be grace-filled with each other and to love each other well, because it's not a love that I can give, it's a love that he's already given her, and I'm trying to model.
I would say the most helpful marriage advice or marriage books I've ever read are mostly just the ones about how to be more like Jesus. Because I feel like we couldn't give you a step-by-step on how to be romantic or how to whatever, I don't know. But I feel like the thing that was our saving grace, because we had no role models ourselves and we had no mentors, was just that we each had a relationship with God that we cared about advancing on a daily basis. I think that was really the only reason that we succeeded.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why, because I have always been amazed by him, that he has always been a very intentional, humble man who seeks after God's heart, and he had no example of that growing up. And I think that God, because of his humility, God just grew that in him and made him into that man. So really, I think just daily relationship with God. pretty much the only way to go about it.
Yeah. And I still remember this. It was one Valentine's Day, and she gave me a Bible as a gift. And the inscription written in the Bible said, our love is great, but Jesus is our greatest love. And that has to be the heartbeat of any marriage. There's no way I can be enough, and there's no way she can be enough. And
We learned that pretty quick.
Yeah, so when you're dating, when you're young and dating, just don't go after being happy. One of the best lines I've ever read in any marriage book is by Gary Thomas. It's called Sacred Marriage. It said, what if marriage was less about making you happy and more about making you holy? And that should be the line you think through when you think about marrying somebody or dating somebody. Will me being with this person make me just happy, or will it help me grow in holiness? That matters.
First meeting with Stephanie, I always am interested in first roommate meetings. What were your perceptions, were they proven wrong or were they proven correct?
Are you looking to see if she's in there?
I don't know, is she in here?
Don't worry, she's gone. You can be wrong. I will need a house to stay after that comment.
So actually the first night that we were roommates, I don't remember having any assumptions of her, or perceptions of her. The first night though, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was just like, oh my gosh, there's a spider in my bed. And I just knew there was. And I started freaking out, which he has experienced this before, but there's a spider, there's a thief. So I started freaking out and I started looking at my covers and everything, and she got up with me and turned on the lights and helped me pull my bed out and started helping me look for the imaginary spider. Didn't find anything, and I slept with my bed in the middle of the floor, and she was just so cool and sweet about that. And you just don't very often meet people that make you feel completely at ease, and who you are is who they're okay with. So it's just very easy being her roommate, and didn't have any previous assumptions, but I think we enjoy each other quite a bit. But only lasted for a semester because Skylar took her away. Very sad. Did you have a question?
Well, I just want to confirm that I hear that you might be sharing what you've been sharing with the students here.
Yes.
That is great. Our kids have come home every week just in awe of your teaching and have loved hearing what you had to say. And you are just communicating in a way that's just touching their hearts, and I just really appreciate that. So I'm excited to hear what you've been telling them.
Yeah, summarize it, Jesus is better. You want to boil it down to that.
All right, thank you.